Welcome, Grattan Puxton. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you back on again. A revered activist that's been around a while, played a part in Ireland, well remembered for it and well appreciated for it. And this is a very interesting, I suppose we call it a podcast, a conversation, an awareness, maybe even kind of a video to put out to people. And it's to do with the World Roma Congress, which will be held on the 17th of May in Berlin. And of course, I'm fascinated myself with politics. I had a dabble in politics back in 2016. And then I come up with the idea of a traveller assembly in Ireland to politicisize ourselves and become more familiar with democracy and try to find better ways of, I guess, coexisting and fitting in. So let me ask a couple of questions around the World Roma Congress. Where did the idea come from, and maybe why is there a need for a Roma Congress in the first place?
Okay, well, as far as I can trace it back, of course, there was quite a Congress taking place in Romania back in 1933, and I believe there were Roma from Poland, from Serbia, probably Bulgaria. But of course, that was buried under the war. The war took over, and of course the terrible Nazi genocide intervened. So it was right up to 1971 before people could get together again. But the roots of the concept for that Congress in 1971 go back into the 1950s, when Vaida Voivod, Jonel Ratoru, as his proper name is, he was a refugee from Moldova, which you hear quite a lot about Moldova today. Mm-hmm. Lots of his family were killed. He got to Paris. He was a writer. He had a couple of books published. And then he had this idea of the Communauté Mondiale Gitane. They weren't using the word Rom yet. And this was to have branches in different countries and so on. And when he heard of Cherry Orchard, he came over to Ireland. And that's how I got kind of recruited into the movement. That's to put it very, very shortly. But there was a period in the 60s when there were plans to have the First World Roma Congress in Paris at UNESCO. But after the formation of the Gypsy Council in 1966, if you like to say, we got a bit impatient because that Congress wasn't coming. So we said, look, we will host it. So the decision was made that the Gypsy Council would host the Congress in London, and that's how it took place.
Is there much an appetite for it? Is there kind of a building up for it? Because obviously it's been around a while. It isn't something that just popped up in the last few years. It's been something that's been talked about and flirted with for decades. So even say now you're coming to this, it's in Berlin. Why Berlin? Why Germany? May I ask you, was this a random place or?
Not at all, not at all. That is where Hitler plotted to exterminate the Romani people, and along with everybody else, the travelers. And if that invasion had taken place after Dunkirk, which was a very dangerous time for Britain, mind you, travelers were on the list. That was called Operation Sea Lion, and it was the purpose was to not only to kill the Jews, but to kill all the travelers in Britain.
There is definitely that, because sometimes we can say that travelers didn't have no direct connection with neo-Nazism and so on and so forth. But that's not the point. The point is that if you were categorized as a certain kind of people and you've been pushed out to fringes, well, you better start sweating, because if they're doing it to other people who are in the same classifications, it's only a matter of time before they get around to you. So it has that kind of effect regardless. In Germany, there's a 3-day event, and there's 3 different locations. And forgive me, I could not pronounce the locations because they're in Germany. But if you have them, you can most certainly name them out. But before we even go there, what kind of preparation and structure has been put in place already? Because I would imagine, and I'm only imagining this, is that if Roma were doing something based on their cultural history kind of vibe, and they create their own democratical process, that it wouldn't be identical to what we call the settled democratical process. Or is it? I mean, how to explain this? Say like in the traveller community, not everybody is just a traveller. Some people are from other identities, LGBTQ, and various other dominions of beliefs and systems. But how do they fit into the same platform? Will there be like a quotation for women? Will there be a quotation for people who are LGBTQ and so on and so forth? Or is it just one person, one vote, and that's the way it goes?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but I do know for a fact that those groups you mentioned are going to be at the Congress, and they will get their voice heard. The way the panels have been set up is that there will be, for instance, one on strategy, then there'll be another one on networking and so on like that. So they have a rather general title, but people of all persuasions can come into those different panels. And then, of course, there'll be the plenary sessions where we should be discussing resolutions and what the Congress has to do after the Congress.
Would it be like mini federations then, wouldn't it?
It is most definitely on a federation basis. This is a reformed World Roma Congress, because in 1978-79, on the second Congress was formed the International Roma Union. Now, we are ignoring that, partly because the IRU never managed to live up to its intentions. Maybe they had a good try at it, but they failed. So this is going back to the roots of the First World Roma Congress, in a sense. But also it comes out of a very big event, which it's very big. It's the biggest thing that's happened since the genocide of the 1930s and 40s. That is the forced expulsion of about 130,000 Roma from Kosovo during the Yugoslav conflict. That's 20 years ago. Yeah. People at that time tried to do something about it. Nothing happened. So that is being revived by the migrants, if you like, the people who were thrown out of Kosovo. They'd been there for 600 years. The whole lot were thrown out of Kosovo. Wow. And 14,000 homes and properties burned and looted. So that is a big issue at this Congress.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The people involved in that, which is called the Kosovo Roma Rights Coalition, made an attempt last year to bring it up at what's called the EU Roma Week in Brussels. But they were totally dissatisfied with the way they were received and the way the subject was treated. It was a failure. So kind of on the spur of the moment, a meeting was called in Brussels, happened to be at the Rosa Luxemburg Center, and there the plans were laid for this Berlin Congress.
Very good.
Try again to force through the issue of Kosovo, but not, of course, Kosovo alone.
Are you meeting much resistance in terms of governments, even the EU, or are they somewhat supportive of Roma and other groups setting up democratical platforms?
Well, we have, if you like, met some resistance from EU, from those experts and specialists in Brussels who deal with Roma issues, because we have not been invited this year back to EU Roma Week. So that shines, we made a bit of a splash there and had a row, if you like, and they didn't invite us back this year. But as to the universality of this Congress, there will be a commemoration at the Berlin Roma Holocaust Memorial. But we want that memorial to be for all who have suffered not just discrimination, but rather murderous attacks and fascist attacks on the camps and so on, which have happened all over Europe, but of course, again, including Kosovo.
Yeah, I was just on that because the German situation and, of course, the Jewish community suffered unimaginably. But I'd like to think that the Jewish people are not suffering nowhere near the same extent as they used to. But it would seem that nothing much has changed for Roma, that they're still getting ill-treated, mistreated, and abused left, right, and centre. And that sometimes we can look into the social media and we can see the negative things, and we forget to see the positive stuff and so on and so forth. But there is no doubt in probably my mind and a doubt in yours that Roma are still getting treated extraordinary, ill-treated and less than human almost in some places. Like when you throw a whole people out after 600 years, that's not far off at all, Germany and Hitler mentality.
That is so, and I wouldn't use the word still because it's worse today, because there is, after the falling the Berlin Wall and the so-called end of the Cold War, there's been a rise of different kinds of nationalism and neo-fascism, which is all feeding very badly here in the UK, very badly here in the UK.
It's taking grip in
Traveling
Ireland
is pretty
also.
well being banned. How can you travel? You've got no rights whatsoever as a traveler in the UK at the moment, and this is so across the whole of Europe. And it's particularly bad, of course, in Ukraine, where there are fascist groups who've attacked camps and killed Roma, and nobody wants to hear about that. And people Roma who wanted to leave Ukraine had great difficulties and held up at the border and so on.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that. It's very, very, very unfortunate. There's another thing that you will have recognised, because sometimes, again, when we get these opportunities to speak about Roma or travellers, we're always coming out of a place where there's a lot of destitute and discrimination and racism. And sometimes we don't get to talk about the resilience and the fight in these people.
That's right.
Endless centuries of it, including Irish travellers in Ireland for 100 years and hundreds of years, actually. But there is a part where we're saying, look, we need to come together. We need to create something. We need to it's not even a case of conservatism. Let's protect our ancient culture and our tribes and so on and so forth. It's about survival, because it feels we're getting constantly assimilated and forced into institutions that are not good for our mental well-being. And I wonder, is that the case also that you find with Roma in other parts of the world?
It is, of course, a kind of course, they talk about integration, they talk about assimilation. Very, very little of that is really happening, and yet it is a threat. It's a kind of a threat to the extermination of Roma and traveler culture. It's a slow genocide. It goes on all the time, but in fact, we are very resilient. I moved to Yugoslavia, after the first Congress, and I saw these huge wedding events going on. There was the blare of music, singing. It was so vibrant and so great to see and experience.
Yeah,
and of course, I know that there is nobody more able to take it on the chin with climate change and so on than travelers, because we are so able to resist the bad days. We look at it as another rainy day coming along, and we're able to adapt.
We came across several initiatives, and one there, and again, in part, we're kind of grateful to the EU. They have made measures and they have put pressure on the state to do things. State are reluctant, of course, but they have this thing to call inclusion, and we're all going to be part of it. And it was part of a university. I won't name them because the project isn't finished yet, but I think they're stalling it. But basically, it was inclusion. So I give the story of Irish travellers, Gaelic clans, and colonisation, and how both existence, travellers and settled, come into it. But when I started doing it, they were saying, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's offensive. That makes the college look bad. This is not the way we want to do it. We want you to tell a story about a traveller who couldn't get work, but now got an education. And then everything worked out lovely." I said, yeah, that might have worked out somewhere in your world, but this is our inclusion. This is our story. So that came, the whole inclusion thing is a bit of a bullshit, I think, because they're not explaining to people in the first place, what does inclusion mean? Because they're still dictating to people, you can't do this, you can't do that. It has to be done this way. That can't be inclusion. And I'm wondering, is that the same kind of treatment that Roma are feeling throughout other countries also, where they're told, sure, let's talk about diversity, let's talk about inclusion, but you can't do this and you can't do that. Does that resonate with you, I should say?
Well, it does, because when you say inclusion, of course, it's just another word for assimilation. But again, it's such on a small scale. It might affect a few dozen people who might get new opportunities, but hundreds and thousands are being left out at the same time. So there's no such thing really as inclusion. And as Roma travelers even longer have been around, for 1,000 years here in Europe, travelers, I think, and Roma for 700 years. If we haven't reached a point of inclusion yet, how many more years do we have to wait for? And do we want it. Do we want it? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either, because, and again, I use this as a prime example. One, you know the history of Ireland somewhat in terms of English colonization. We've mentioned about the systems that have never changed. So when you're talking about inclusion and inclusion and integration, it's still into the same unchanged institutions that had colonized us in the first place. They're not giving us no freedom. They're not telling us be expressive in the arts and politics and education. They're just telling us get in line, and eventually they'll break you down. They'll tell you have to do this and do that. Now, I'll say one other thing, and then we'll go back to our fellow Roma. When you look at the travel organizations in Ireland after 50 years, and this is no fault of anyone's, because good deeds, good intentions, all of that are there. So they're good people. So physically, it looked like it was getting better. There was better opportunities. There was more, whatever. Those things getting physically better. But psychologically, in the 50 years, things got worse, worse, and worse, to the point where 9-year-old children were taking their lives because they were bullied over their ethnicity. And nobody could explain to what ethnicity was, what culture was, what identity was, because we got so beaten down by the state. They didn't want travellers telling their side of the story. They didn't want to hear about Gaelic Ireland and colonisation. So that was my biggest conflict with NGOs and state institutions, that they weren't supporting people. That was just bullshit. They were just steering them into an assimilation process, where they were telling them that if you wanted to be a traveller or if you wanted to be a Roma, you got to go through this institution first. And these are the same unchanged institutions for centuries. And we know by health statistics and mental well-being that they're absolutely almost psychological genocidal practices on subconscious to the people that are doing it. Now, I'm sorry for ranting on, but I go back to our fellow Roma, because we talk about resilience fight and the music and the history. People, I don't know what most people think of Roma. I know people don't think much of travellers either, but they think we're almost degenerated people, that we're the leftovers of some other society, without recognizing that we have an origins, we have a history, we have a very long history. We've been here hundreds of years with the same issues. And unfortunately, that gets lost in a lot of awareness. So back to the Roma, 3-day event, right? It's resilience, it's a lot of history, a lot of culture. Is it exclusively for the Roma? Is there other groups part of this, like Sinti, travellers, and so on and so forth? Or is it just this time around inclusively for Roma?
Okay, first I'll just give a footnote to that idea about assimilation, because what are we supposed to be assimilating into when you look at the wider society? It's got so many problems and it hasn't got a hell of a lot to offer. You know, I'm a bit of a left-wing person myself.
Likewise.
And I think that it's just going to be pushing us, if it was to happen, which is not going to happen, but it is a way of wanting to push us into kind of, you know, the lowest situation in a society which is dominated by billionaires, and we are not the billionaires. So we're going to be at the bottom, but we don't want to be in a system where we be at the bottom. I think the travellers have hacked out over the centuries and generations a way of existing as providing services from the fringes, but services which leave the individual his own boss. That is the essential thing. And the thing is about traveller and Roma, first comes family, first comes self, first comes our own identity, then comes the necessity to do some work to bring some cash in to keep the family going.
Yeah.
We're not looking for, well, of course, there are exceptions to this. There are now some successful doctors, lawyers, sociologists, name it. But generally speaking, the mass of our people want to be self-employed and self-directing, if you like. So that's my
I think that's pretty much it, because we've been doing a lot of the things that settled people are doing now and take for granted has always been here, whether it be Irish music, poetry, all these things that stayed with the travellers, then we can spread it out into the public domain again. Of course, you take it for granted it was always there, it was theirs.
No, but you're asking about Roma, Sinti. Now, this Roma Sinti thing is a bit of a speciality in Germany,
right?
Because the Roma are separated by certain events from the Sinti, because the Sinti have been very well organized as German citizens, particularly around Romani Rose. and people have got it in their head that there are Roma and there are Sinti, and these are two different things, but they're not two different things at all. The Sinti are the same people who in France call themselves Manouche. Go to Spain and you meet the Calais, and there are many dozens of different groups. So why we hang on to this thing Roma Sinti is a rather artificial situation. The Congress is open to all, and as far as I'm aware, most of those groups will be there and will be talking together and coming together.
Would you say there's many people have signed up for it? Many people going to turn up in Germany for the 3-day event? Have you got any feedback?
I would say, if anything, there's a disproportionate representation of organizations in Germany, and they do have this specific issue of wishing that Roma should have the same status of Sinti who are German citizens, because what's happening to Roma is even if you are born in Germany, you may still be treated as a foreigner and deported perhaps even back to Kosovo, back to Serbia, back to Albania. And when I say back, these are children who have never been in those countries, but are then forced out through the German government's
that can be in itself an absolutely, it can be a soul-destroying experience, because if you grew up in a world, a culture, a language, a way of being and seeing, and then jolted out of that world and put back, even if you came from the old one, but jolted back into it, and it would be extraordinarily strange for starting off. You wouldn't be accepted, you'd be semi-rejected, because you've lost a lot of cultural traits and conscious stuff, I guess. So it's a bit of an ordeal, for sure. So will you be speaking yourself at the Congress, Grattan?
I will be addressing the Congress on the second day, and I will have quite a lot of input into the part where we're discussing the democratic transition, which is the idea of introducing global electronic voting for future Congresses. We've got a lot of work to do on this. We've done several years of work already, but we're not there yet where we could have. But all the technicalities are available. The technology is there to do it at no great expense.
So this is actually a very good
global system. Pardon?
So, I beg your pardon. This is a very good time to get involved, because in this 3-day event, you're also talking about workshops. Now, the whole idea of the workshops is to tell people this is work in progress. This isn't a fixed, done, written off thing that you come up and sign. This is something you can be part of, influence, change, and participate. That's the whole idea of the workshops.
That's right. And with democratic transition, the first phase of it is, which we're well into now, is to have a network which any organization can use. And that network will take you around to 6,000 or 7,000 organizations and individuals right around the globe. And this can be used for mobilizations when we have outrages like killings and beatings and camp evictions. I mean, you see a certain amount of protest happening now, but it's a bit touch and go. But we can tighten up that system and have a really global reaction when anything bad happens, but also, of course, on the cultural level, it put people in touch with each other.
Absolutely. Have you found also then in recent years that maybe modern technology has boosted, helped both Roma? I think they have with travelers, because again, we're communicating, we're seeing other people's sufferings, we're making comparisons and similarities and how it's all connected. So has that played an important part leading up to this Roma Congress?
It very much does. The technology has been a great gift to us. If you imagine in the First World Roma Congress, there were only about 12 organizations, and we had to go through the old snail mail methods of communication. Now we've got this mass instant communication. We've got people in Brazil, got in the US, we've got quite a big Indian element in the Congress. So this is a huge gift, and we must make the best use of it.
What would you say to people? I say people, not just Roma, because you've opened it up and said it's not just Roma. But what would you say to people in terms of turning up, getting involved? Because a lot of politics it's a tricky business, right? You have to have a certain, I don't know what you call it. I wouldn't call it backbone, but you need some kind of thickness in you to survive in politics, because it's a very cutthroat business. But is it if you were to say to people, we would like people to turn up and this is what you would expect over the next 3 days, would you like to get that a crack?
That's okay. That's okay. But there are limitations. I have to say, on the technical side, just to be dead honest, in the democratic transition, there is a technical limitation, and that is you need to have access to emails. But it's a limitation, but it's also a challenge, because there could be 100,000 people out there in our communities, many more perhaps, who could come into that system. So, we just have to press ahead. Now, as to the Congress now, it's a 3-day Congress on the 15th, as a matter of fact, from 15th of May through to the 17th. The organizers have limited resources. They could only accommodate in hotel 100 delegates.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And we've reached the limit on that. But anybody who has the wish and the ability to turn up in Berlin for those days will be very much welcome to come in. There's no space. I mean, there's no limit of space in the halls. We have booked the Berlin City Hall, so we've got plenty of room. You will have room there, and you will be able to listen and so on. If you can't do that, you can get on a live link. There will be a live link, which you'll have to look on social media and find the live link for the Congress. And certainly we want everybody who possibly can to turn up for that remembrance event around the Holocaust genocide memorial, because what's happening there is that German railways are threatening to do a terrible destruction on our memorial by putting a line across it and destroying the trees and so on. They want a new railway line built across it. So part of that event is also a protest and saying that this shall not happen, and if necessary, we shall defend that memorial against the intentions of the German railways.
Sometimes, and it's my own experiences, sometimes our biggest obstacles are actually ourselves, and sometimes our support groups who come reliant on state funding and now are tied into jobs and don't want to rattle the boat too much, or rattle the cage, whichever the saying goes. Are you finding it, say, like there's a lot of groups in Ireland, Traveller and Roma? This is the name they've given themselves. We are a Traveller Roma organisation. And there are other agencies and other people say they support Roma. Have you found it, or have you contacted the national organisations and said, look, guys, you get funded and you say you represent the Roma. We would like you to take out at least a minimum of 2 people and pay for their tickets, send them to Germany if they're interested in politics and they're interested in this stuff. And that should be their responsibility. It should be almost automatic, where something like this comes up and they say, oh my God, Roma Congress, we have to reserve at least 3 places for our fellow Roma, and we're going to pay for it and cover it. Any of that kind of stuff happening?
Of course, yes. There are, I think, at least a half a dozen, what you'd call, I call them intercontinental organizations, because I don't like to use the word international, because we are on the way to being one nation, and they're coming. Yeah, they're coming.
That's brilliant.
Some people are too far away, like the Federation of Roma in Brazil. They feel they're too far, too expensive, but they'll be on a live link. Argentina will be on a live link. United States is sending a bunch of people. So on. Yeah, they're there.
That's brilliant.
There's no doubt that everybody's heard of it and know that they are invited.
Brilliant. And is there a voting restriction for voting itself? Is it 18s and over? Is it 16s and over?
In the voting system.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have thrown out the idea that anybody above 15 can vote. I haven't tried to analyze the 6,000 or 7,000 people who are already on the voting list, whether, what ages they are. But I imagine they're all from quite small to...
That's actually, it's a cultural difference, you could say. And it's a strange one, because I remember years ago, about 20 odd years ago, we were coming up with something. And we had the voting in at 15 years of age. That if you were 15, you could vote. And people were saying, oh my God, that's very young, and let children be children. We're saying, well, that doesn't, a 15-year-old in the traveller community isn't the same as a 15-year-old in a middle class community.
That's right.
Or a different environment. At this age, and if we go back not too long ago in Ireland, people were getting married at this age. But that's not just a reason. It's a case of some people have to mature faster in life, especially when you're under the reins of oppression. You're always constantly alert and so on and so forth. So I think it's absolutely brilliant, because now you have a gap between the 15 to whatever 18, and they will have some political know-how and experience. And I think that can only be a good thing both for Congress and democracy right across the board for everybody. Is that the case, or should we throw the 15-year-olds out, not let them in?
No, not at all, not at all. I think even if the 14-year-olds want to register, they would be registered right now. There's no hard and fast rules to settle down. It's one thing the Congress has got to do is put down some hard and fast rules. But us who've been working behind the scenes for democratic transition,
let me ask you another
have
question.
a very, wide.
Say within the Congress, I'm sorry for cutting across you, I'm still useless at that kind of stuff. But in the Congress, so we just talked about the age, 15 or 14 and upwards, and that's like one category covered within the democratical framework. Is there other such dominions, I don't know what you'll call them, other groups that can also participate and be protected, but might not normally get that if it was just a standard voting system like the external ones, the settled ones, where you're still a minority and you're still disliked? Is there a way of balancing that for the people that have less power? It doesn't apply here. You're catered for. I'm probably not even saying this or explaining this wrong.
That's a little bit futuristic, but yeah, things like that might need to be balanced out, need to be considered, and so on. But the big aim of democratic transition is to get past this old era which has haunted us of having, self-appointed presidents, having gypsy kings turn up and so on, and it kind of detracts from the seriousness of our political situation. But also, every nation has a political system, has a democratic system, a voting system. We need to have one to be taken seriously. I think that if we had 100,000 people voting in a selected collective leadership, which would also be recallable, I think that's an important element. Our politics would go up a huge, big step. It would mean that Roma nation travelers would have a much more powerful and respected political voice because they would have the legitimacy of a mandate from their own people.
Yeah.
At the moment, people in Brussels, Romano Rosa, France, who is one of the MPs from Germany. It's a German MP, Green Party, takes a big part in Roma politics in Brussels. He himself has said, as Romeo France, that it's all a top-down situation at the moment. He admits that. It's top-down. We need the communities to come alive. We've got to break some apathy there, but the communities to come alive, to start voting, and not just to be voting, but to be activists as well in their communities. And once that happens, and there is a collective vote, and something that can be seen and believed in, then our politics will take a huge step forward.
What's your view then? Because what I'm gathering, I'm pretty much, I'd like to think on the same kind of page as yourself. I do believe that an internal democratic process should be developed, should be brought from the culture, the history, and the way people think of what would be fair and just. But I've seen, and you've seen them yourself, we call them NGOs. I don't know what right terminology, quasi-quangos, whatever we call. They're advocating for travelers. In this case, I can talk directly about travelers. They're advocating for travelers to sign up, vote, register to vote, but nothing to do with traveler politics, but register to vote in the settled domain and become part of that system. And somehow or another, they feel that they are doing great work by encouraging people to go back into the institutions. Is that the case in Roma? Are they advocating sometimes to go into the mainstream politics rather than advocating creating a Rome politics?
These two things have got to go along parallel. If there's a chance that somebody can get elected onto a local council, do it, and do as much as you can in that direction. But let's have also our own system and our own political voting system. But there has been some success. I mean, we've had several MEPs. In fact, at the First World Roma Congress, Juan de Dios, who was only a teacher at the time, later became the first Roma MEP, and I think there's about half a dozen now. So we want those people there. They can do a job, of course. And that goes down then to the parties, independent Roma parties in Bulgaria, Serbia, and so on.
I think that's what I'm saying, is that because, like I said, I have been dabbling in politics myself. We know Martin Ward from Tuam. He was the mayor of Tuam many years ago and stuff like that.
Okay.
And we know other travellers who ran in politics. So that's good. But there was something about that. And in the same way, when people were calling themselves representatives, now they could be in a support group, and rep itself is a political statement. It says that you are the rep over people. You're representing people on their views. And that to me was absolutely nothing. They had no foundation, they had no connection, they had no direct links back into the community, there was no accountability, no responsibility, pretty much like the settlement. So that was the kind of thing I was always worried about. I thought if somebody who was saying, I am a traveller and I am running in the election, well then therefore I have to be bound and tied to, say, like a traveller assembly, where the community almost dictate to me what's going to be covered in politics, and not me deciding what's important and what's not is important. That was the kind of system we were kind of looking at. I think, in a sense, maybe it's similar to the Roma Congress, because again, we can say go in and become an MP, become a mayor, go into local authorities, but if that's as far as it goes, and there is no direct link back into the community or accountability, well, I don't think it goes. It's not. Wherever it goes, it still doesn't bring justice back to the community around their own ideological beliefs and systems. Maybe I'm venturing a little bit off there and into the unknowns. I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, because I think for myself, Grattan, was trying to map out political ways of doing things. How can we create that balance, do it in tantrum? So we have travellers involved one side, but they're also accountable to the community. And I'm wondering, is the Congress a bit like that? You can go out and you can be the best MP, best politician in the world, but you are still accountable and responsible in this realm, this foundation or Congress.
Yeah, it's good if you can reach that situation. I mean, if you go back to Cherry Orchard, we had a committee at Cherry Orchard which was in charge. We were, of course, just trespassing on 26 acres of land. Nobody wanted to know much about us until they wanted to get rid of us, and then they started getting interested. And of course, the church moved in then and set up, I think it was called the Dublin Itinerant Settlement Committee, with no travellers on it. We were not to be involved. So we were totally, the power that we had, a little bit of power that we had at Cherry Orchard, was totally taken away from us and became,
that has never stopped.
Yeah, I don't know how that is today, but that was the starting point of a lot of it. Yeah.
Well, and again, it's no one's fault. Sometimes I think settled people get scared and get afraid. Sometimes they don't know what the Roma and the travellers are going to do. So we're going to create some spaceship or some time bomb or something and destroy it. So they have to feel the need to be involved. Because remember a time Nan Joy started up the Minker Misting, the organisation, and then they became a little political. They put up on the billboards. Then the government came along and pulled all the funding. That was the end of Nan Joyce and the family. Then they started up travelling, training, education centres. But this time, all of these support groups and organisations were now going to be led with people who came out of Trinity College and Maynooth College, and were all middle class, upper middle class people. They've been running Party Point for 40 years like that, unchanged, no representation, no democracy. We all know, but nobody talks about it. And we've got other organisations that are still influenced by settled people. And in Ireland's case, it's a unique one, because the settled people, in my opinion, are the people who need the help when it comes to identity. They've claimed an identity to be Irish inside an English system and institution, unchanged in 22. They've othered the travellers, pushed us to the fringe, people killing themselves. So there's a huge identity crisis in Ireland around this stuff. And I'm thinking, hoping that platforms like the Roma Congress will give travellers like myself and other travellers and other Roma that freedom of expression. Say, look, let's call a spade, a shovel. This is what we think is happening. And I'd like to think that it will play out like that. As you know, as I kind of rant on about a lot of this stuff, because sometimes I get caught up in interpersonal feelings when it comes to politics and Roma and travellers in Ireland. What would be a message you would like to send out to Roma and anyone else wanting to come to Germany for from the 15th to the 17th of May, which is only couple of weeks away.
Yes, yes, it is.
What would you like to say to these people, and how would you like to encourage them to come along, or to participate, or to go online, tune in, go to your website and stuff like that?
Okay, sure. Anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'll do my best to answer and facilitate them being in Berlin. I'm on romavote@gmail.com. But I also make a note of what is happening on a broader way from what you were just saying. A while back, the problem was a lot of people would hide if they got any. They thought they'd got on in society. Now we get people who succeed but are not going back. Sorry, we got trouble. Okay, internet connection's unstable, I hear.
Yeah,
A lot of people who are getting trainings are not coming back to the communities that need them most. They have got up better. They're still carrying the flag, but they're not connecting up. In other words, it would be people who, if there was a cherry orchard today or there was another Dale farm, they wouldn't be there. But they're happy to sort of stay, as you say, they've come up into the middle class and have left behind their own people, or they may not say that or be honest about it.
Oh, well, we would always find rogues. There's no doubt about it, because I used to be one myself. I'm a retired rogue, so I recognise them a mile away. But some of these people were just claiming the label of traveller, and having no real connection to the community, not going back to the community, didn't live with the community, became psychologically separated from the community. And sometimes this happens that we take on an education, we learn new words, new expressions, and we become distant from our own community. But unfortunately, if people could only realise that that's not the worst thing, because if they could only say, look, now they have the skill set, they've learned from the settled people, they've learned from the institutions, and to come back to their community and say, look, this is what I've learned, this is what I think is going on, and then communicate from there. But unfortunately, in Ireland's case, it's almost like travellers are being made to feel, still meant to feel shame of being a traveller. And somehow or another, this new traveller now in the NGO, let's say, who are now want to be educated travellers. And this is the way to go. And we're trying to say to them, that is what the settled people have been saying since 1963. They've been saying that since 1922. This is the way to go. Education, accommodation. They're just repeating the exact same orders of the system all along. And I think that's why we have such chronic issues today.
That's it. Well, my experience is totally the opposite, because people say, yes, first we've got to get education, then we can have some reforms. We'll be able to push through, and get a better life. But I have found that if people are going to fight for their rights, it happens spontaneously within seconds. You see the bulldozer approach your wagon, you become immediately an activist, whatever you want to call yourself. You are there to fight back and save your home. Talking about having an education, having training for this and that, that's not needed. What you need is the instantaneous bit. The community finds its own leaders in a critical situation. That happens time and time again.
Absolutely. I will clarify this, because again, I can only use one word at a time and they come out in a certain way, and I never get to say the things that because it's multi-layered, it's complex. It's not just one subject matter. It encumbers almost everything. So when I say education and stuff like that, I'm not knocking the education. I do see education as a tool.
Of course.
But in Ireland's case, education was used as a weapon. It never told travellers about colonisation, never told them about anything other than we were inferior and we needed to settle people's health. And we needed to be educated like the settled people. Of course, when we take a step back and we say, look, at your education system all have their origins in Westminster. They never changed from the Queen's colleges. Your acts, your laws, your policies had their origins in Westminster. They never changed in 22. So when we say education, we're not saying down with education or down with democracy. We're saying these institutions are diverting us. They're telling us things that are just can't be true. To somehow or another, in some case or another, in Dublin, some of the senior politicians would even question the fact, was Ireland really colonised? And they would almost say, no, we weren't. So there's people that believe that, and that's fair enough. But that's their education system, and we know something different. So that's my clash with the education, I guess. It's not to knock education, but to question the institutions.
Well, that little school that we built at Cherry Orchard, which was the second school, of course, it was called an atrocity by the higher parts of the education system at that time. Although the big school in Ballyfermot, I think it was Our Lady of the Angels, they would not accept traveller children there. And the Cherry Orchard School was run on a very progressive basis, following the Montessori system, in that the children who hadn't, of course, had education experience or classroom experience before, they could come in and they could leave at their own will. Usually the problem was people did not want to leave because we had to do things in shifts. So the people who'd come at 10 o'clock were supposed to leave at 11 o'clock, but they still want to hang on because they were enjoying it, you know. And when later the system was changed around and people were supposed to be bussed down from Ballyfermot to somewhere in the city and be taught by nuns, they had a very bad time. One little chap was locked up in a cupboard because he wouldn't keep still in his desk. Well, you can't keep still if you're not used to keeping still.
Absolutely.
So where's the atrocity? I think the atrocity was happening downtown, and we were giving them a great break there.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, we're in
There's a little exhibition going on now, I think, in Ballyfermot.
Yeah, we're in the 60-year anniversary, 1963, since
Right.
the report. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping to follow up with you again in the very near future, next few months maybe, or whenever suits you. And we get a panel together. We're going to talk about some of the 1963 stuff, some of the school. I became a fan. I didn't know this. It's a new word I came across lately. It's syndicalism. And is it syndicalism? Is that the word? Syndicus.
Yeah.
There are people with it's a philosophical, left-sided philosophy. And I believe these people played a small little part in the 1963 Cherry Orchard also, because they were kind of communists, anarchists, syndicalists, which in some ways, the modern world thinks these are some bad labels. That these are kind of troublemakers and they've got motorbikes and want to kill people. But of course, the philosophical side of it is that these are actually really good people. And a lot of it we can trace back based on old Gaelic culture, democracy and freedom of voting and who can vote and who can't vote, stuff like this. So there's a lot of wonderful connections with things that later on you start to click and you start to see those things and it unlocks a lot more. So that's why I became big fan of yours, your involvement in 1963. I'm going to finish up because I think now I can edit this and take out bits and pieces, right? And I'll make it nice and compact and have smart looking and take out my rants. Is there any final messages or any kind of thing you'd like to say yourself to the world, or would you like?
Well, I think I've said most of it in answering what you want to say. I'm very optimistic for the future, not for my own future, because I'm 84. I'm not in great shape at all, but I can only say that I will die happy if that Congress in Berlin is successful, and I shall die very dissatisfied if it isn't. But that goes for everybody else who's in this movement. Yeah. We have to step forward bravely, because there's huge challenges out there.
Absolutely, it can be a big step, and sometimes when we're taking these big steps, we become quite volatile and vulnerable. We're exposing ourselves. You might see sometimes in the past where people say, I wouldn't go to a protest. I'd be too ashamed. There'd be people looking at me. And you'd be thinking, well, you're getting destroyed by the same people that you're ashamed to be seen protesting against. So there is new barriers and new obstacles to be breaking down and broken through, I think. And I hope the Congress is one of those moments that the changing point for the Roma and indeed other communities around the world to say, look, we can come together. We are intelligent people. We've got the modern technologies that was once reserved for the institutions of education. Now we've got access to them. Let's create our own democracy and let's be fair, just and loving and caring. Because what we don't want is a repeat of the same old colonial source code where people come at the top, people get pushed down to the bottom. If you have a system like that, well, you're just talking about capitalism really at the end of the day.
Sure. Take the best that you can find, but keep the best of your own with it. That's the way. That's the way we have to go.
That's a nice
I'm sure we can do it. Thanks for
Martin,
having me on.
It's been an honor, and for guys, like I said to you, I'm only half your age, and you look You look much better than I do sometimes. So I hope you get what you deserve, and you've put a lot of work into this. It's not just what you deserve, I think it's what we all deserve, because we've all been fighting this, and without skilled people like you, without people with the formal education, we would have been most certainly lost, because we were held at a huger disadvantage. But at least there was there people like yourself with education and know-how. So look, guys, I don't know a great deal, but I know that's shit, and that thing is going to hurt you. That's just bullshit, and we need to change that. And I think with people like you to encourage, like a lot of travelers like myself, to get involved.
Well, if you talk about education, I didn't know a damn thing, but I learned a hell of a lot on the road over the last 60 years from experience rather than any education system.
Well, there you have it.
But there you go.
Grattan Puxton,
Well,
mind yourself, look after yourself, and I hope everything works out well, my friend.
The best to everybody, and let's keep going forward.
Thank you very much. Take care of yourself, my friend.